Sorg nicht keinmal aus, du geist dem letzten Weg, wenn Himmeln bleierne verstädten bläuen Tag. Küber wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schau, das Wetter beugt und unser Trott mir seinen Dor. Küben wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schau, das Wetter beugt und unser Trott mir seinen Dor. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißem Land von Schnee. Wir kommen on mit unser Pein, mit unser Weg. Wo gefallen's dieser Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwura, unser Mut. Wo gefallen's dieser Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwura, unser Mut.
She's waiting for a signal from the producer. Oh, who's the guy who was standing there. Oh, him.
Good evening and welcome to this year's Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration in Harrow. My name is Steve Levinson and I will be introducing the various contributors who have come together this year to mark this solemn occasion. This is a special year. It is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp and also the 30th anniversary of the Bosnian genocide. Later, we will hear witness accounts from both these terrible events and reflect on this year's theme, learning from genocide for a better future. As well as our audience here at Harrow Arts Centre, we welcome many more who are watching this on a stream from their homes. Harrow, of course, is a home and a refuge for people of many faiths. So I'd like to ask Rabbi Kathleen DeMacty Middleton from the Mosaic Reform Synagogue in Stanmore to lead us as 12 faith groups, each in turn lights a memorial candle for the 6 million Jewish people murdered by the Nazis and the countless other victims of genocide.
It is an established tradition to light 6 candles on Holocaust Memorial Day in memory of the 6 million men, women, and children that perished during this dark time in history. 1 candle for 1 million souls, a number hard to comprehend. Tonight, however, we will light 12 candles. We invited 12 representatives of Harrow Interfaith to light a candle each on behalf of their faith community. We invited them to do so in memory of those who died and all that died with them during the Holocaust and in subsequent genocides. And we invite them to light this candle as a pledge that we will work together to ensure that such a destruction, such a Holocaust, will not happen ever again. Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, it says in Proverbs. The human spirit is the light of God. As we look at these lights, imagine 6 million candles, each of which with a name, each a unique and precious soul.
I, Edith McCarthy, light this candle on behalf of the Baha'i faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Sister Georgina, light this candle on behalf of the Brahma Kumaris faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred. Oh, sorry.
I, Senevi Aturupana, light this candle on behalf of Buddhist faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide and racism and hatred.
I, Thomas John, light this candle on behalf of the Christian faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Dilip Chaubal, light this candle on behalf of Hindu faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, David Cryer, light this candle on behalf of the humanists and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Bipin Seth, light this candle on behalf of Jainism, faith, and promise to work for better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Betty Fraser, light this candle on behalf of the Jewish faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
Thank you.
I, Tafael Ahmed, light this candle on behalf of the Muslim faith and promise to work for a better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Simon Engwell, light this candle on behalf of the Quakers and promise to work for a better future without genocide, without racism, without hatred.
Hello, I, Dr. Shaminder Singh Mahavey, light this candle on behalf of the Sikh faith and promise to work for the better future without genocide, racism, and hatred.
I, Rohinton Munshi, light this candle on behalf of the Zoroastrian faith and promise to work for a future, a better future, without genocide, racism, and hatred.
We remember our 6 million dead who died when violence ruled the world and evil dwelt on earth. We mourn for all that died with them. The world has become a poorer place. They are like candles which shine out from the darkness of those years, and in their light we know what goodness is and evil. We salute those who had the courage to stand up against evil. They are a source of hope when we despair. May such times never come again, and may their sacrifice not be in vain. in our daily fight against tyranny and persecution. Their memory gives us strength and leads us on. We remember now in silence. מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסירים, לנשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שמתו על קידוש השם, ינוחו בשלמה ובשלום שלא ידעו בחייהם. הנא בעל הרחמים, אז תירן בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר Amen. God full of compassion, whose presence is over us, may the souls of our 6 million dead who have gone to their everlasting home with the holy and pure on high, who shine as the lights of heaven, find the safety and rest denied them on earth beneath the shelter of your presence. Source of mercy, cover them in the shelter of your wings forever and bind their souls into the gathering of life. It is God who is their heritage. May they be at peace in their place of rest, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Kathleen, and all our candle lighters. I would now like to invite Councillor Jean Lamiman, who is the Vice Chairman of Harrow Interfaith and the portfolio holder for Harrow Adults and Public Health, to say a few words and to introduce the Mayor of Harrow. Jean.
I'm told this is working. Yes, great. I'm very pleased to see everyone. I will introduce the Mayor almost immediately, Mr. Mayor, just to say that this group that we've been working on for years now, running this event every 27th or 28th of January in memory, really brings it home to us today. How significant it is with the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation. So with good hearts, we must commemorate together. And I'd like to invite Salim Chowdhury, Councillor and first citizen of our borough.
Thank you, Councillor Lamian, for that kind introduction. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Anjana Patel, Deputy Lieutenant Simon Evans, fellow councillors, ladies and gentlemen, it is both an honor and a solemn privilege to stand before you today at this important commemoration of Holocaust. Today, we gather not only to honor the memory of millions who suffered and perished during one of our history's darkest chapters, but also to reaffirm our commitments to ensuring that such atrocities are never forgotten and never repeated. As we reflect on the lessons of past, let us stand united in our resolve to combat hatred, intolerance, and discrimination in all its forms. Together, we can cultivate a society rooted in respect, empathy, and understanding. Thank you for being here today as we remember and honor those who were lost and as we stand together for a brighter and more inclusive future. On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to invite you all to join us in remembrance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you both very much indeed. By the way, the beautiful keyboard music you heard earlier on was provided by Lydia Buffy and was drawn from the Jewish Day of Atonement prayer book. Our next contribution is also musical and is performed by the Mosaic Synagogue Choir under the direction of Robert Davies. So please welcome them to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our first piece is Enosh Kechatzir, which is Psalm 103, verses 15 to 17. It is well summarized by its first line, frail man, his days are like grass. Next is Sachaki Sachaki, to wonderful words by Sol Chernikovsky. This poem existed for 50 years before it was set to music, and this is now the best known tune among several. Again, I summarize the first verse for a flavor. You may laugh at my dreams, but I still believe in mankind, as I still believe in you.
Sachaki, Sachaki, Al-Halomot, Su'ani ha'chol ensach, Sachiki ba'adam ani, ki odeni manin ba'ach, Sachiki ba'adam ani, ki odeni manin ba'ach. Ki od nashit rosh ha'efet, long ha'tiva le'egel bas, Ki od amin gam ba'adam, gam berucho ruach has. Ki od amin gam ba'adam, gam berucho ruach has. Gam behastit, afin birchot zerayom, Yisu shalom, asu bracha le'omino. Yisu shalom, asu bracha le'omino. Finally, more up to date, and looking more to the future, to 1970, with the song Bashana Haba'ah, which means next year. These words are a traditional formula of hope for us. It is a Jewish tradition to look forward to a better time next year, and we bring a fervent hope for a wonderful future for us all. ילדים בחופשה, לשחקות תופסת בין הבית לבין השדות. עוד תראה, כמה טוב יהיה, בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה, כמה טוב יהיה, בשנה הבאה. ענבים אדומים יבשילו עד הערב, ויושלו צרנים
Isulen adere pitoni, Yeshani dana. Otire, komatoriye, Bashana, Bashana, Otire, komatoriye, Bashana, 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 Ifros kapot yadayim, mul ha'or hanika halavan. Nafal levana, tifros konafayim, le'Hashemesh tizrach betocham. Otire, komatoriye, Bashana, Bashana, Otire, komatoriye, Bashana, Bashana.
Hold on. Well, thank you, Robert, and the Mosaic Choir. Later in the programme, there will be some more music and some more readings as well. To remind you, the theme today and this year for Holocaust Memorial Day is learning from genocide for a better future. So how can we use the lessons of past genocides to avoid making the same mistakes again? There are dwindling numbers of Holocaust survivors to tell their stories. So 80 years on, it's falling on another generation to ensure that the lessons are learnt. Our next speaker, Debra Barnes, is one of this second generation. Her mother, Paulette, experienced as a child the horrors that Nazi tyranny inflicted on her family. Here is her story.
Thank you. I'm going to start the story by showing you the front cover of a book that a cousin in America found about 20 years ago. It was written by Denise Holstein, and you can probably see it's written in French. So for those of you who don't speak French, I'll translate the title. It translates to, "I will never forget you, my children of Auschwitz." Auschwitz, the most notorious of the Nazi death camps, where over 1 million people were murdered, most of whom were Jewish. This is the original photograph from the front cover of the book. The picture was taken on the steps of an orphanage for Jewish children in a village just outside Paris in 1944. This is Denise, the older girl on the right, who wrote the book. You can't see the color, but she's wearing a yellow star on her blouse. She was 16 years old here, and she had the responsibility of looking after this group of children who were the youngest at the orphanage. And there on the back row in the center is my mother, Paulette, and to her left, her sister, Annette. Paulette and Annette, they were twins, but they looked quite different here, especially as my mother had clearly had her head shaved not long before, which is how they dealt with head lice in those days. But when we first came across this book and my mother saw the front cover, she was shocked. She was 5 or 6 years old here, and she'd never seen this photograph before. In fact, she'd never seen a photograph of herself at this age. When we read the book, we read that Denise believed that all the children in this photograph had been murdered at Auschwitz. She had no idea that my mother was still alive. So let me tell you my mother's story. This is the Sklar's family. You've probably seen the photograph on the cover of the program today. I'm very honored. These were my grandparents, Cecile and Tretel. They were both born in Poland, but they left there for France around 1920. Many Jews left Poland at that time because of the anti-Semitism they were experiencing. My grandparents met in France and they married in 1924. The 3 boys in the photograph were my uncles. The eldest, Jacques, who's standing at the back, the youngest, Nathan, who's standing in front of his mother, and the middle son, Jean, on the right-hand side. Now remember Jean, because I'm going to show you another photograph of him in a minute where he looks quite different. And there's my grandfather. He's got his 3 sons and now not 1, but 2 beautiful baby daughters. One of them was my mother, Paulette, and the other, her sister, Annette. But we don't know which one is which in this photograph. All the children were born in France and therefore were of French nationality, and that would be very important later on. The family were living in Metz, and just circled it in red in the top right-hand corner of the map. As you can see, it's very close to Germany, which is in purple on the map. So when World War II started in September 1939, my grandfather made the decision to move the family from Metz further into France, away from the German border. Now, my grandparents were lucky. They were one of few who had their own car at that time, which my grandfather used for business. He would drive around selling clothing. Of course, they were a family of 7, and they took my great-grandmother with them as well. So once the whole family were in the car, there was very little space left, except to take a few essential items. All their other belongings had to be left behind. So my grandmother, like a good Jewish mother, left everything neat and tidy and washed the floors of their apartment before they left so that it would be nice and clean for when they returned. But they would never return. My family went to live in a tiny village called Virelais, which is near Poitiers, circled in red, and several other Jewish families from Metz, which had had a very vibrant Jewish community, also relocated in that area. And my family went to live in a farmhouse. In this farmhouse, which was very different to the modern apartment they'd left behind in Metz. This photograph is of my uncle Jean standing in front of the farmhouse. Jean was the middle son, who I pointed out a moment ago. He was 11 years old when they first went to live here, and as you can see, he was considerably older when he returned to see the house many years later. This tiny village of Virelais mainly consisted of houses built either side of a main road, but this farmhouse that my family were living in was a little bit hidden off the beaten track, and my grandparents and the older sons thought that this was probably a good thing. Of course, my mother and her twin, well, they weren't even 2 years old at this time, so they had no idea what was going on. Well, my grandfather wasn't able to carry on with his clothing business. He offered to join the French army, but was refused. So he got a job helping to make aerial bombs for the French Air Force. The local people from the village were friendly and happy to sell food to their new Jewish neighbors. My uncles went to the local school and played football with their new friends at the weekends. And everyone adjusted to life in this small village, quite different to the big city of Metz that they'd come from. After a few months, in May 1940, well, we know what happened. Germany invaded France, and a month later, France surrendered to Germany. An armistice was signed between France and Germany. Oh, that's not working. Can we get the map? Thank you. Which saw the country divided into two. The Germans occupied the north and west, which is where my family were now living. So they're now living in German or Nazi-occupied France, and that is the part in yellow on this map. And the unoccupied zone, known as the Free Zone or Vichy France, would be under a new French government led by Marshal Pétain, a World War I French war hero, but now he was working in very close collaboration with the Nazis. Back on the occupied side, the German soldiers came in and took over many homes in towns and cities, but they pretty much ignored the village where my family were living because it really was that small and insignificant. My Uncle Jean remembers that some German troops marched through one day, declared it under the control of the German army, and then marched on out again, much to the relief of the people living there. In October 1940, the first racial law was passed, whereby Jews were forbidden to run their own business. They were only allowed to shop during certain times of the day, usually at the end of the day when there was nothing left to buy. And they were not allowed to go to public parks or cinemas or go out after dark. And later, the law would force all Jews over the age of 6 to wear a yellow star with the word Juif, Jew, in French. But still, my family continued to live relatively peacefully in this small village. A year later, in October 1941, further racial laws were passed, gradually taking away more and more basic human rights from the Jewish people. They were no longer allowed to hold religious services that year. But when the Jewish New Year came around, my grandfather offered their remote farmhouse to be used as a secret synagogue. And here's my Uncle Jean telling us about that time.
The next day we emptied the whole house, the furniture, the top and the bottom, and then all the Jews in the area were notified they're going to be all the services. And by that time, things were getting really bad. And the kids were not allowed in, there wasn't enough space, so we were outside and they took all the furniture out and all the people from that came, men and women, and they started praying and crying. It was a horrible scene because by that time, even I was a kid, I still didn't know what was going on. I mean, I knew it was bad with the Germans, but nobody knew that they were that bad. Anyway, they prayed and prayed, and as a footnote, that all the people that prayed in that house, that Yom Kippur and that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there was just Monsieur Russak and his son came back from a concentration camp, and then Paulette, myself, and Jack survived. And there must have been maybe over 100 people in that house. Nobody survived. Everybody consequently were all arrested and nobody came back.
But actually, they weren't arresting people quite yet. And in fact, it wasn't until July 1942 when they started making the mass arrests of mainly foreign-born Jews in France. Specifically, the 16th of July, that was the date of the first roundups, mainly in Paris, because that's where most of the Jews lived, but also all over France. And that was the night when they came to arrest my grandfather. There was a knock on the door of the farmhouse.
The next day we emptied the whole...
Sorry, can we go
the
to
next
the
day
next
we...
slide? Thank you. There was a knock on the door of the farmhouse. It was the middle of the night, and no one heard the truck of German soldiers and French police come down the gravel driveway. Note I say German soldiers and French police. They were working in close collaboration. My grandfather was arrested that night. The reason? For being a Jew. It was mid-July. Pack warm clothing, they told him. You'll need it where you're going. And he was sent straight to Auschwitz in Poland, According to the Auschwitz Museum, my grandfather was dead just over 1 month later. He never needed those warm clothes. We know, of course, that the arresting officers only told prisoners to bring warm clothing to give them a false sense of security, and so they'd hand themselves over without a fight. The cause of his death is recorded as kidney disease. But he was a healthy man, just 40 years old. He'd been an amateur wrestler in his youth. The Nazis would make up a cause of death. They had lists of illnesses, and after they murdered their prisoners, they would choose one for the death certificate. After my grandfather was taken, never to be seen again, my grandmother was in a terrible state. But less than 3 months later, an order was given for all remaining Jews in the area to be arrested and sent to the internment camp in Poitiers. Children born to foreign parents but of French nationality must not be arrested. However, children under the age of 6, even of French nationality, whose parents are to be arrested must be left with their parents and, consequently, will be taken with them to the Poitiers camp. These arrests must be made on the night of October 8th and at the latest on October 9th. The French police and German soldiers came again to the farmhouse in the middle of the night. And according to the decree, they arrested my grandmother. And because my mother and her twin sister were only 4 years old, they had to go with their mother as well. But because their brothers, my 3 uncles, who were then aged 17, 13, and 10, were over the age of 6 and born in France, they were not arrested. So they were left alone in the otherwise empty farmhouse. The minute the curfew was lifted the next morning, my uncle Jacques, the eldest son, rushed to the Gestapo headquarters in Poitiers, the nearest city. The Gestapo was the Nazi secret police and not someone that you messed around with, but Jacques had no plan. He just knew he had to do something, anything. He knocked on the door of the office of the head of Gestapo and asked him to please release his young twin sisters who'd been arrested the night before. Thank you. They were being held in a transit camp in Poitiers with their mother. A transit camp is where prisoners were sent before being deported to other concentration or death camps, such as Auschwitz. The head of Gestapo looked curiously at my uncle Jacques, who was only 17 years old. I think he must have been surprised by his cheek, by his chutzpah. But my uncle said he hadn't really thought about what he was doing. He was just desperate to save his young sisters. The head of the Gestapo set him a challenge, no doubt, for his own amusement. He said, "There's a restaurant in town called Café de Jet d'Eau. Can you tell me what it would be called in German?" Well, I showed you where my family were living in Metz, very close to the German border. Half of the population there spoke German, so Jack had quite a good understanding of the language, and he took a guess. He said, "I think it would be called Wassenspritz in German." "You are correct," said the Gestapo. "Take this note to the French police and they will release your sisters." Well, I have to say, when I first heard this story, I thought that sounds too incredible to be true. But incredibly, my cousins in America managed to find the note in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., 70 years later. And here is my Uncle Jacques telling us what happened next.
I went to the door, to the gate, and I gave the guard the papers, and I told him what it was. And he walked into the office over there, and sure enough, about a half hour later, the 2 girls came walking out. And my mother was at the gate, saying, take good care of them. And I put them in the wagon that I had attached to my bicycle.
Did you speak with your mother at this time?
I don't remember anymore, I'm talking about 1942.
Did you ever see your mother again after this?
No more. That was the end of it.
The twins were allowed to leave, but their mother was not. And that was the last time that my mother saw her own mother. The girls were 4 years old. My grandmother was 41. She was sent to Auschwitz and straight to her death in the gas chambers. Now, all the grown-ups had been arrested, and the only ones left at the farmhouse were the 5 children. Jacques was thrown into the role of head of the family. That's quite a responsibility to have at the age of 17. He had to decide what to do. He wanted to keep the 5 siblings together, but it was soon obvious that the younger children needed someone to look after them. A kind neighbor, a Catholic lady, took in the twins, while the 2 middle brothers went to live with another Catholic family nearby, and all the siblings got together at the weekends. And this continued for 1 year until mid-1943, when a letter arrived to the farmhouse ordering the 4 younger children to report to a Jewish children's home in Paris.
There was a letter from the French police came in and says that all children must report to Paris, to there was a Jewish agency, l'UGIF, l'Union Générale des Juifs Français. And we have to stay there. They will not permit us to stay anymore in that area. That was also a big mistake, because what they were doing, they were, instead of grabbing the whole families in one piece, they were taking piecemeal. They take the father, the mother, and one kid, and the others. That was the reason for their the way they were operating.
Jacques was reassured that his siblings would be safe and well looked after in Paris, so he took them there. This children's home was full of Jewish children whose parents had been deported. In reality, they were all orphans, but no one knew it at the time. They all hoped that their parents would still come home. The children's home was run by a Jewish organization, but under the watchful eye of the German soldiers and French police, who were working in collaboration. Every few days, a German soldier would come with a list of the children and ask if they were all still there. He wouldn't bother to actually count the children himself. The Nazis ruled by fear, and the people running the home knew that they would be punished if any of the children ran away. So they made sure that didn't happen. I found this photograph on the Yad Vashem website about 10 years ago, and I was able to identify my mum and her twin sister, their brother Nathan, and Denise, who wrote the book that I showed you at the beginning. And my uncle Jean, who was then aged 14, was quickly on arrival moved to a trade school in the center of Paris, as he was considered too old to be at the children's home. And a few months after arriving at this children's home, the children were moved. So the 3 siblings were still together, and they were moved to another orphanage in a suburb outside Paris called Louveciennes, which is where this photograph was taken that I showed you at the beginning. And one of the older children was assigned to be a monitor to look after the little ones. That was Denise. She was a teenager and also one of the orphans. Denise was very kind to the little children and became almost like a mother to them. She would later tell me that the children were happy there. In June, the Allies landed in Normandy, D-Day, and started to advance through France. So Denise got the children together and told them the good news, that the war was coming to an end. But until somebody came to take them home, they had to stay where they were. And come July, they're still waiting. This is a Translated extract from Denise's book.
On the morning of the 22nd of July at 6 o'clock, when there was not yet anybody in the streets of Lucienne, I saw through the window of my room a German officer and some civilians making their way towards the house. I hastened to the office of the director, who received me coldly. But the officer was already there. He had come to arrest us, all of us. The house was surrounded. It was necessary to wake the children, dress them, and put their clothes and a little food in their blankets, for we did not have any suitcases. Apparently, the Germans were anxious that we left before inhabitants of Lucienne awoke, so they could not witness this arrest of young children. They pushed us roughly onto a bus. The little ones didn't understand what was happening, and we told them we were going to the country. We encouraged them to sing. Me, I quickly realized we were going to Drancy. I was not too upset, for I knew that I would be reunited with old acquaintances. The end of the war was near. The Allies had landed in Normandy 6 weeks ago, and we would soon be free. On arriving at Drancy, however, I was a little less calm when I saw a large number of buses full of children. Then I realized that all the children's homes had been raided.
Every child from the children's homes in and around Paris were arrested that morning. 241 Jewish children. The commanding Nazi officer was Aloy Brunner, and he said the reason was to exterminate future terrorists. The French police considered the children to be the evidence to prove the terrible crimes they had collaborated with the Germans to carry out. They were the orphans left behind after their parents had been deported to the camps.
On the morning,
Drancy. This was the transit camp in Paris where Jewish prisoners were taken before being sent on to the concentration camps. It was actually the site of a large housing estate which was still being built when the Germans took it over to use as a transit camp. As you can see from this photo, it was quite modern in design, very different from the wooden barracks of the concentration camps. These were, in fact, the first high-rise apartment buildings built in France, and I always think it's so shocking to see such a modern building being used as a Nazi prisoner camp. Well, 9 days after arriving at Drancy, the children were sent on convoy number 77 to Auschwitz and immediately to their deaths in the gas chambers. Denise was saved because she was older and she was selected to work as a slave laborer. My mother's twin sister, Annette, aged 6, and their brother, Nathan, aged 12, were murdered on arrival. The convoy they'd been sent on was the last train to leave Paris for Auschwitz. Less than 3 weeks after the children were sent to their deaths, the Allies liberated Paris from the Germans.
Great Paris is now free, and very free is Paris.
But what of my mother? Had she been with her brother and sister, well, she would have also been murdered, and I wouldn't be here to tell you her story. Just a few days before the children's homes were raided, my mother became ill with measles. She was sent to the hospital to recover. When she was sent, it was the first time that she was ever separated from her twin sister. And of course, they would never see each other again. And after a few days in the hospital, the doctors heard about the plans for the raids, and they handed my mum over to some nuns to hide her in their convent. And that is how my mum managed to stay alive, thanks to the luck of having measles at the right time and the kindness of the strangers who helped her. A lot of Jewish children were hidden and helped by the nuns in this way, and it was such a secret operation that I've never been able to find out the name or convent of where she was hidden. Well, my mum's two older brothers, Jacques and Jean, both survived the war. Jacques was working on a farm and later joined the resistance. Jean was hiding in a Catholic boarding school and had many adventures all over France. This is all the children in this photograph were Jewish boys hidden in the Catholic boarding school. And they've managed to find my mother's name on a list after 1 year in the convent, and the three siblings were reunited. My mum was sent then to a DP camp in Toulouse, just outside Toulouse. And the people there were very kind and looked after the children well and tried to find homes for them to go and family members for them to go and live with. In total, 1,200,000 Jewish children were murdered during the Holocaust. Only 150,000 Jewish children in Europe were still alive after the war. 10,000 of those children were in DP camps in France, and my mother was one of those children. After 2 years, a cousin was found in England. My mother was 9 years old. She didn't speak a word of English, and she was sent to England to be adopted by her new parents. And here she is at the seaside with her new family. And later, Mum would take myself, that's me at the front, 1 year old, and my sister to America to visit our two uncles who settled in America. And I might go a little bit over time, sorry. I have to show you this. We're going to go back to the book that I showed you at the beginning, because after 62 years, my mum and Denise were reunited in the south of France, where Denise lives. Obviously, a very emotional reunion.
All good things come to an end, and we must
We're
say...
saying goodbye, but next year we're coming back to see Denise.
We're not saying goodbye, we're saying au revoir, à bientôt. Thank you for everything.
This is my little mama.
Right. We've had a lovely time, and we will do it again.
Oh. Go back? No, it doesn't matter. I went to visit Denise myself as well when I started to do the research for my family history. And I went to visit Denise a second time last summer, 2 months before she died at the age of 97. So you now know more about my mother's childhood than she ever knew herself, because I only started to do my research after she died in 2010. It was kinder to leave her not knowing how her family members had died. I visited France many times and... No, we're going the wrong way.
All good.
Next, yeah. And I went to the Shoah Memorial in Paris, to the Wall of Names. All the names of the 76,000 Jewish people from France who were murdered during the Holocaust is on this wall. I'm going in the wrong direction. I'll leave it. Including the names of my grandparents. Thank you. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so once I found out the incredible story of what had happened to my family and my mother, I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. So I do talks like this. I speak to a lot of school children, and I try to teach them, as we've mentioned before, the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, and ask them to be kind to others, particularly those who are different. And I wrote a book about it. I wrote a novel based on my family's story called The Young Survivors, and that is the end of my story. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, for telling us about Paulette. And the underlying message, I guess, is that light can triumph over darkness. So thank you. Our next contribution is from our next door neighbor in Hatch End. Rabbi Naomi Goldman of Kol Hai Synagogue has a poem that she'd like to share with you.
It's the responsibility of all of us to remember, to never forget, so that this never happens again. And I'm going to read a poem that was specially commissioned for tonight's event and was written by Linda Seymour. It is in your booklet. It's in the middle of your program. Do not forget. The truth is out, echoing down the last 80 years. You say you did not know. You turned away from death by the minute, death by the hour, death by the day. Death by any other name was all too much for you to contemplate. Green fields to black ash, death on every blade of grass. Now you walk the place where more than 1 million perished. Your numb foot walks guiltily. You shudder my name. Tears fall into ash bones. Skull to bone, bone to brain, brain to hope. Gone. Removed. Vanished. Now, again and again, our memory swept by your denial. To you, it appears my life never existed. My legs once walked with a face that saw the sky. You cannot stop history painting your guilt. Out of your shadow, we rise like a phoenix. We will always exist. We will always make you remember us. Out of your memory, you must build a better future.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, 2025 is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. But were the lessons learned? This year is also the 30th anniversary of the Bosnian genocide. We now welcome Safet Vukalic. His is another story of how families can be ripped apart and ethnic minorities terrorized when hatred is unleashed.
Good evening. It was quite emotional to hear Deborah's story because it is the first time that I've heard your story. So thank you for sharing. For me, every time I've had the honor to be at so many events and have met so many Holocaust survivors, and I've learned a lot from Holocaust survivors. And And every time I've heard their story, whilst I'm hearing the story, I'm hearing that child who's 4 years old or 6 years old or whatever age, suffering, watching their loved ones being taken away, in some cases killed in front of them. And that's what we seem to forget, because I remember learning about Holocaust and world wars, and it was usually about when did it happen, the dates, amount of people killed, in names of the camps, dates of the camps closures and liberation dates, etc., but not actually talking about the suffering of children specifically who survived, and everyone's happy, but they'll live with those memories for the rest of their lives. I get emotional every time I talk, even though genocide in Bosnia happened 30 years ago. Many would say that's a lot of time and it should be better, but it feels sometimes as if it was yesterday. And I'm sure that if you speak to Holocaust survivors, as I've learned from them many times when they're speaking, they get emotional because it still feels fresh and it still feels unreal. How could someone be so horrible to do that? Because someone's of this or that faith. But it also hurts when we see that others have watched for many, many years. When it came to Holocaust, it was in 20s, the things that were happening that we just would like to think we wouldn't allow it happening today. But unfortunately, we seem to disengage and try and sometimes ignore it in hope they will get better. When the words were spoken after Holocaust, never again, it sounded great. Never again, we will never allow this to repeat to anyone anyway. But yet, as we see since then, the world has still been divided. And it almost depends if you got a friend who's going to look after you, a big brother, so to speak. Otherwise, you are vulnerable. And unfortunately, when Yugoslavia started falling apart due to power struggles, republics decided to go independently, become independent countries. And first it was Slovenia and Croatia. In 1991, war broke out as Serbia controlled most of the army, so they tried to control Croatia too. And we, in Bosnia, weren't sure what to expect. Many people hoped it wouldn't happen, it wouldn't come to that in Bosnia, because Bosnia was so mixed when it came to religion. The biggest group was Muslims, but we had Serbs who were Orthodox Christian and Catholics who were Croats, and also we had Romas, Jews, and families mixed, neighborhoods mixed, and it was difficult for many people to see how it's not going to happen in Bosnia. Croatia is different, Serbia is different, Slovenia is different. And initially I was thinking the same thing, but as things progressed and politicians' language changed in Bosnia, the threats of Muslims being wiped from Bosnia should Bosnia gain independence, things started to feel worrying. Things started to change people's minds. And I certainly thought it's going to be worse here, because this unity that we have in our neighborhoods, families, friends, is not liked by everyone. It's not liked by those in power, those with guns. And when in January 92, there was a declaration of and creation of a Serbian autonomous republic within Bosnia, in unity with the occupied Krajina in Croatia, and this was all supported by the Serbia and Montenegro at the time. And we thought, what is going on? Why is our country now being divided? And whilst war was brewing in Croatia, you still hope for the best. Bosnian independence referendum took place at the end of February and 1st of March. Overwhelmingly, people voted to become independent country, and we did on 1st of March. But as soon as that happened, the Serbian forces, as I said, the army was predominantly controlled by the from Serbian regime. They started taking over local governments where they weren't in power already. And we heard on the news killings in places, and you still cannot believe what's going on. And at the time, Bosnian president asked for UN to send the UN forces to Bosnia because he was afraid of what was to come. Yet, as we know, and we witness that year after year, UN is very slow because it depends on politicians taking actions. And unfortunately, that didn't come in time. And I watched soldiers walk to my street shortly after our local government was taken over. They walked through the streets asking for all the men to come out. Now, actually, what I forgot to mention, especially important because considering some similarities with what was happening, how people had to be marked as Jews and their shops and houses. Similar thing was happening in Prijedor on 31st after the Serbian government took over the local government in Prijedor and the region. They declared that all non-Serb, non-Orthodox Christian houses and people who are to walk outside should wear white armbands on 31st of May 1992. And you couldn't believe this. This was Europe, 1992, and people, because of their specific fate, they have to wear white armband when they're outside, supposedly for their own safety, but we knew what that meant. And also houses had to display a white flag. They said for your safety and also to declare that your allegiance to Republika Srpska so you wouldn't be harmed. However, we also saw Serbian houses being marked with Serbian house. And why? Because we also heard that there were paramilitary units along this with the Serbian army that was coming into Prijedor. And there were two most known, some of you might have heard of, Arkan Tigers and Chetniks. And this, to me, and other people might feel different, was because the local Serbs, or the extremist government, they didn't feel the local Serbs in Prijedor would be willing and able to do the horrors that they planned for us. And we also learned that there was a meeting that took place in 1991, and this came during Hague trials, that the plans were made of concentration camps in Prijedor, factories to be turned into concentration camps, and who's going to run which camp. And my director of the school, the primary school that I went to, was chosen to run one of those concentration camps that my brother ended up in. So, as I mentioned, I watched movies all the time, and I've watched so many war movies, war movies where, you know, the Nazis come and kill many people, take people away, and then few people who are partisans usually come and defeat the Nazis in Yugoslavia and etc. And I was seeing soldiers walk down my street and ask for the men to come out, and men walking up the road and being taken away. And I started walking as well. I was 16 at the time, and my mum said to me to go back. You're just a child. And I've never argued with my mum, and I wasn't going to do it that day. So I did listen. I went back to the house, and I believe that saved my life. I would not have the strength to survive a concentration camp. My brother was taken. My dad was taken, along with the rest of the neighbors. And we don't know where they're going to take him. You hear shooting every now and then. Well, I find out some of the things that happened on that day. One of the soldiers came to my dad, because my dad was in a group with a few other men, and this soldier walked up and said, "Can you tell me what happened here?" So my dad said, "Well, we didn't have any war here. We've been patrolling our streets together, mixed neighbors, mixed patrols, just to make sure nothing happens in our neighborhood. We didn't want anyone to divide us, to do anything here. We just don't know what to do." And he said himself that he was from Serbia and he was part of the territorial army. He was told to go on training to prepare to defend Serbia should there be need for it, and then was sent to Bosnia. And he said, I'm here because I have to. I've been told I will never work again if I don't. So my dad, he then walks away, and my dad's called up because my dad used to be part of local territorial army, but as I said, there was no war. And when the local government took over, everyone who was part of the territorial army previously had to come in, sign off. If there was any uniforms, you had to sign off. Bullets were counted. Everything was signed. Everything was on paper. My dad was called from that paper to come forward along with a few other men. and they started beating people up, one after the other, and it was turned for my dad next. And this soldier, who was from Serbia, he was part of, obviously, the people collecting them all, but he came forward and said, "Stop this." Our neighbors who were Serbs were not involved in collecting people. They were watching, some of them from the streets, some of them from their fences. But this soldier from Serbia saved my dad from being beaten up. And he said, "Stop doing this. You don't have to. If we have to follow orders and collect people, that's what we have to do, but you do not have to beat people up." At the same time, then a commander of the unit also recognized one of the other neighbors, and then he said, "Stop this." So the beating stopped. So my dad was saved that day. My brother was hit by another soldier in the head 5 times. He started bleeding. That soldier walks away. Another soldier comes to him and says, "Come with me." And he takes him to wash his blood away. They started bleeding, and he brings him back to the group. So even those soldiers from the group who took people to concentration camps were not the same. And we have to be mindful, whoever we're talking about, they are never, ever the same. And we should not treat everyone the same just because of their religion, just because they were even soldiers of the same units. So they were taken to a factory initially. We didn't know. We knew they were taken away, and we then asked our neighbors, and some of them were afraid to do anything to go and try and find out. My mum went to a few neighbors to ask if they could go, and Serbian neighbors, to try and see if they could go and find out where they were taken. Eventually, we heard that they were taken to a local factory called Keratum. That was turned into a concentration camp. And there were already some people there from other villages that we did see before being burnt. My brother and dad were taken there first for a few weeks. And some of the soldiers, some of the guards would actually allow food to be brought in. So when we heard when those guards were on duty, my sister and my few other women from the neighborhood, they would just pick up any food they had, just go straight to the camp and give them food. And some guards would actually allow my brother to come over and take the food and say, "Yeah, we're okay." And then my dad was, and some guards wouldn't. Some guards would threaten him and say, "This is not a holiday camp. Go away." One of my neighbors was killed. He was, if I remember correctly, in his 80s. He was an older gentleman. He was taking food to his sons, and he was killed. They only found out much later. And a few weeks in, my dad was taken to a concentration camp called Omerska. That was his second concentration camp. And when we got that news, and I went to the bathroom, locked myself, because I thought, that's it. I've lost my dad. Because what we heard by that point was that people were taken there because they were someone known, or someone else wanted them to be removed, to be killed. We didn't know who could want that. My dad never hurt anyone. And that was difficult. But you still hope for the best. And you keep asking neighbors and friends and anyone who's can get us a message. And eventually we did get a message that my dad was still alive. And then came August 1992. Now, up to that point, most of the sort of pro-Bosnian media reports that were being sent out, talking about concentration camp, etc. And in the West, it was mostly sold as this is Muslims propaganda, just because the Bosnian president was a Muslim, but his parliament was mixed. That didn't matter. He was a Muslim, and Milosevic, and from Serbia's side, was selling it as these are Muslims, and I have a solution. So he was seen as someone the West could work with. And throughout the war, Bosnian army was so often referred to by Western media and Western governments as Muslim army and Muslim government. Yet our perhaps most famous general who passed away a few years ago was actually a Serb, a Bosnian Serb, but who didn't want to go against people, against country. He actually took side and organized defense of Sarajevo. But that wasn't playing into the narrative. Most famous commander of the police in Sarajevo, chasing snipers from the building, Serbian snipers, was also Serb himself. But again, it was sold as Muslim army, Muslim police, Muslim government. This is a religious issue. We cannot get involved. We don't know who to defend. You defend people who stopped the war. Then you can later on discuss who's guilty or what. I wasn't interested who was going to be found guilty of genocide. And I wanted my dad back and my brother. So in August 92, British journalists have got permission to go and film the concentration camp. I would perhaps say tricked, but they pressured Serbian government and from all the reports that they were getting, and they said, come and film for yourself. These are not concentration camp. Some people are taken for a reason. There are camps for others who come to feel safe. And I knew how my dad and my brother went. So what they did is, before British journalists arrived, Keratin camp was closed. My brother was transferred from Keratin camp to Ternopily concentration camp. My dad was transferred from Omaska to Manjica concentration camp. So Omaska, they left a handful of people, and you can still find it today. If you look up concentration camps, British journalists, Penny Marshall or Ed Vuliami or any of those will come up, and you can watch the video yourself. When they go to Omaska, there's a handful of people come to a canteen, they have food. You can still see people are scared. They try and ask them questions, but people are unable to engage. And they try and ask the guards what's happening, etc. And then they go to Ternopily concentration camp. And at this point, my brother's there. And I remember watching the video report myself. And as they go through, and I believe it's on 15 minutes throughout the report, that they show the white house, which was used to be a school. And on the window, there's my brother, two of my neighbors, and another neighbor from neighboring street. Happy he's alive, but he is a concentration camp. And if you turn their video into black and white, you will question whether that's 90s or whether that's 40s. And I thought, now this is British journalists telling people, telling the world, we have concentration camps. We have to do something. We have to stop this. That was 1992. The war continued for further 3 years. The world kept watching. Embargo was imposed on Bosnian army. Sarajevo was bombarded every single day throughout the war. The longest siege of capital in modern history. Old bridge in Mostar was destroyed by Croatian army. Stood there for centuries, connecting communities. 6 safe havens were created throughout the war in Bosnia. There were supposed to be safe havens where the UN would protect people. The Serbian army was supposed to pull back far enough. The Bosnians would then hand over their weapons and the UN would protect them. Never happened. Serbian army never pulled back. In other places, some of those places, Bosnians continued to defend themselves. Žepa fell, and then came July 1995, Srebrenica. And UN stood aside because the world couldn't get round quick enough to sit down and put a stop to this. You can again find those videos on YouTube, watching UN soldiers standing aside, watching Serbian army coming in, promising that no one's going to be hurt, but then eventually start taking men away. Muslim men, boys, older men, women to other side, some women taken away for other reasons. Men were taken away, and many of them were taken to be killed. Some of them tried to make it to the safety through the woods and mountains. They were hunted. There are mass graves all over Bosnia. There's still mass graves not even dug up fully, not permitted, because half the country is still run by people they've occupied in the first place. There are no permanent memorials in the concentration camps that my dad was in. Not allowed. That's in Europe. And watching, I've again had honor to meet survivors of Srebrenica and many mothers from Srebrenica and around Bosnia have still not found their loved ones. My neighbor who was in Prijedor, who was killed, only half of his body was found and still not fully recovered. Not all the remains were recovered. His mother passed away, never being able to fully say goodbye. Many mothers have still not been able, and many have passed away without having a bone even. In some cases, there are women who have decided to bury a bone, a single bone, just so they could go somewhere and say goodbye. And this was all preventable. The war eventually ended because the world decided to take action, but it took over 100,000 people to die for action to be taken. And we cannot continue this. we cannot keep saying never again, yet we're just slow to act, or sometimes we just decide to turn blind eye or find a reason why not to get involved. People will misuse religion because that is the easiest tool to use to divide communities. And unfortunately, we keep falling for it, and we don't know which side to take. Well, take the side of the child that's getting killed. If you look at a child, you wouldn't know what the religion is. So why do you need to know which religion they are, should you say them or not? We have to do better. I know we can, but we have to act. It starts with our communities, it starts at schools, it starts friends, co-workers. When you go back today, back to your homes, don't just stop there and think, I'm going to go to Holocaust Memorial Day event next year. No, talk to people. We have to change. We have to build a better future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Safet. There's another reading now to be given by the Deputy Lord Lieutenant of Harrow, Simon Ovens.
Rabbi Hugo Grin was for 32 years at a West London synagogue, as well as being a tireless campaigner for tolerance, a well-known broadcaster and a regular contributor to the Moral Maze. He was a leading voice in interfaith dialogue, and he was a Holocaust survivor. Hugo was 13 when he and his family, his father, mother, and younger brother, were taken from their home in the market town of Berehova, forced into a ghetto, and from there transported to Auschwitz. His father and younger brother did not survive. Reflecting on this terrible time, Rabbi Grin wrote the following in his autobiography. Those who survive a tragedy such as the Holocaust cannot keep silent, but they must do everything in their power to testify to the fact that life is a gift of God and that it is sacred. I recreated a family. I have devoted my energy to building up my people. I also became and remain a kind of ethical nuisance. Wherever there is oppression or hunger or brutalization, regardless of color or creed, I consider it is my moral territory and their cause is my cause. Bigots and fanatics are my personal enemies, and I intend to do battle with them until they become civilized, decent people, if need be, for the rest of my life. Time is short and the task is urgent. Evil is real, but so is good. There is a choice, and we are not so much chosen as choosers. Life is holy, all life, mine and yours, and that of those who came before us, and the life of those that will come after us.
Thank you. As you're probably aware, Harrow Interfaith has been once again heavily involved in putting tonight's event together. So our next contribution is from Gopal Bachu, the chair of Harrow Interfaith and also the chair of Bereavement Care.
Sorry, as you know, Harrow Interfaith have been involved in organizing this particular event. Me and my team at Harrow Interfaith, we've done this for almost 15 odd years now. And I must say that today, seeing those children, it is a very emotional time, a very emotional moment. Worshipful Mayor, distinguished guests, and friends. The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is For a Better Future. And this year also marks the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia, as you've just heard. It was quite moving listening to the narratives of our two learned speakers, who with immense bravery and courage have recounted the unimaginable trauma of their experience. Their testimonies, set against the backdrop of our theme for Holocaust Memorial Day this year, must make it imperative upon us to create an environment and work actively towards a future free from hatred, persecution, and violence. It is our moral imperative to remember what happened all those years ago and to talk about it, as we have just done today. And in keeping these memories alive, we make our world a better place, and as we push back the darkness of discrimination, hate, and ignorance. On Holocaust Memorial Day 2025, as we come together in our communities, looking at the situation in the world around us today, let us accept our collective and individual responsibility to stand up against prejudice and hatred. We must remember what happened, we must learn from it, and act to create a better future. I was honored to be part of the national commemoration yesterday at the Guildhall in London by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. And I would like to quote from a message from the Chief Rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mavis, who reminded us, there is a better future if we carry the legacy of our extraordinary survivors, not as a burden, but as a beacon. There is a better future if the promise of never again is not whispered in sorrow, but rather it is a pledge that is proclaimed with strength and with courage. Thank you. Before I leave, can I ask, because this event cannot happen without the support of, you see three logos there at the back on our flyer, but the London Borough of Harrow and its team there support us a lot to put this together, the team here as well. So I would like the Managing Director of Harrow Council, Alex Dewsnap, to just say a few words. Thank you.
If I'd have realised I was going to be asked to speak, I'd have worn a tie and possibly not worn jeans. Gopal, thank you very much. So as the council, we've supported this event modestly, I think it's fair to say, but obviously we make the Arts Centre available, the Elliott Hall, for a number of years, because it's very important to recognise this. I'm always very humbled when I come to events such as this, but especially when we look at Holocaust Memorial Day, just for the stories and the emotion, the the reality that we need to do better, both as individuals, as organizations, and as society, to ensure that we don't allow such things to happen again. I won't say any more because I am unprepared for this. Thank you, Gopal. But just to say the council supports this event, the council supports all of you to make sure that we ensure that Harrow, especially as a borough, with the many faiths that we have, ensure that we work and live together peacefully and in harmony. Thank you.
Thank you. We have just a couple of more closing reflections on the significance of Holocaust Memorial Day. So I'd like, first of all, to call on Rabbi Shia Green, after which we'll have our final musical contribution from David Phelps, who you may know well because he normally is here with his choir, but today he will be performing by himself. So next two, please.
Good evening to you all. Thank you to Gopal and Bobby for the kind invitation and the opportunity to speak this evening. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we pause to think and to reflect on the sacrifices of our ancestors, of the persecution that they endured, and on the remarkable miracle that is the Jewish people. After the Second World War had concluded, and 6 million of our brethren had been mercilessly slaughtered, the Jewish people looked around, they surveyed the ruins of what was left, and they looked to pick up the pieces of our shattered nation. They could have sat by and given up, they could have wept and raged, but they didn't. They looked forward, not back. They chose hope, not despair. They chose life, not death. What our persecutors at that time, and they didn't know and seemed to ignore from previous persecutions, was that the Jewish people aren't governed by the same set of rules as everyone else. We are governed by an inexplicable conviction to always believe in a better future, no matter the circumstances. In October 2021, Benjamin Wurzberger, a Holocaust survivor, passed away aged 95. When he was young, he was working on the railroads in a Nazi death camp, and it was there that a member of the Gestapo saw him staring heavenward one day and said to him mockingly, "Are you dreaming of Jerusalem? Are you imagining what it would be like to be there? Perhaps one day you will realize your dream." And then with a chilling laugh, he added, "If you're lucky, your ashes will blow in that direction." That became a defining moment for Wurzberger. Every day thereafter, he lived with a conviction and determination to prove that evil soldier wrong. He promised himself, "One day I will make it to Jerusalem, mind, body, and soul." He survived the war, made it to Jerusalem, and started a family. Already advanced in years, one day he made his way to the offices of the Jerusalem Heritage Foundation, which preserves the sacred sites in and around Jerusalem. He asked simply, "I'd like a job." They looked at him and replied, "We don't have a job for you. You're after retirement." To which he said, "I'm not looking for payment. I just want something to do. Maybe I can wash the stones of the Western Wall." And so it was every single morning, Benjamin Wurzberger would get up and head to the Western Wall. He would clean the hallowed stones and clear the notes to make room for the new. Now you might wonder, from where would an old man get the strength and drive to do this? Explained Wurzberger, he thinks back to that Nazi guard in his vicious remark, and he scrubs the stones with a smile on his face and victory in his heart. When I stand at the wall, I hear the voice of the Nazi officer amongst the thousands that are praying, and this is my motivation. There are those today who continue to persecute us and believe they will drive us from from our holy land, unaware of the fact that the Jewish people possess an unconquerable spirit. We refuse to give in to terror, bitterness, or misery. We, the Jewish people, are a collective affirmation of life. Our existence and our achievements are a living testimony to one of Judaism's most profound messages to humankind, which is tragedy will be defeated by hope. Says the psalmist, Hashem oz la'amo yitain, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. May God bless his people with strength and peace. May God bless every man, woman, and child with safety and security. May God bless our leaders with the vision and courage to establish lasting peace. And may God bless each and every one of us in this room with the strength to continue our mission of peaceful and productive collaboration as we look forward, striving to ensuring a better future for us all. Thank you.
This is a very short prayer, so I'd like to sing it through once, and then I'd like to invite everybody who knows it to join in singing it with me twice through, with all the passion for peace that you can muster, and then I'll finish it off again at the end. Oseh shalom bimromah, Yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kulam imeru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, Yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kulam imeru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Yaseh shalom bimromav, Yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kulam imeru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Oseh shalom bimromav, Yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kulam imeru amen.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Rabbi. We're reaching the end of our evening and the end of our commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day for this year. But as we've heard over and over again today and yesterday, the work of education and remembrance goes on. So to bring our evening to a close, I'd like to invite a few words from Mr. Brian Markison from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, followed by Bobby Riesel, the chair of the Harrow Holocaust Memorial Day event.
Your worship, Rabbanim,
interfaith leaders, it's my honor and privilege to be here in Harrow today. It's a very special day in the calendar, and now I'm going to go completely off-piste, as the Prime Minister did yesterday in the Guildhall, when he referred to his recent visit to Auschwitz with his wife, and they visited Barrack 27, which is the Yad Vashem barrack there, and they looked at through the 4.5 million names of the identified survivors, not the survivors, the perished who died at the hands of the Nazis. Yad Vashem has now identified over 5 million Jewish people who died, and Victoria looked for the names of her family. She found some of them. There are many members of my family also listed there, because I'm a second-generation survivor. My late father got out of France just in time, and Deborah, your testimony resonates particularly closely to me because most of my father's family perished in Auschwitz, but 2 of his cousins survived, a little bit like yours, because one cousin survived in a convent, and my father's cousin Claude survived in a monastery. He later became a priest who died at the age of 89, but just before he died, he was still driving around Paris in his deux chevaux, and he taught at the Sorbonne, and he was a character, a joie de vivre, full of life. And I don't know who saved his sister Jacqueline, but perhaps it could have been in the same convent as your mother was at. I've just got to say, we know Holocaust Memorial Day. It was agreed in the year 2000 by the UN and 46 governments, and it's been commemorated in the UK since 2005. It sort of irks me tonight that we have such a fantastic audience and many interfaith leaders and faith members, but it irks me that we should have young people here. It's the students who need to be educated, reminded of the past so that they can ensure that Holocausts and genocides never occur again. Because we know where persecution can ultimately lead, and we have a responsibility to recognize that the language of hatred or exclusion still exists here in the UK. In particular, there's been an enormous rise in anti-Semitism, leaving many Jewish people feeling vulnerable and isolated. We see too the many Muslim people fearful as anti-Muslim hatred has increased over the past year. There's still much to do to create a safer future. And this day is a warning from history, and a recognition the present plays a part in that. We can speak up against Holocaust and genocide denial and distortion. We can challenge prejudice, but we must encourage others, and once again, particularly our young people, to learn about the Holocaust and more recent genocides. I thank you all for being here this evening to commemorate and hear about and hear the testimony. And I urge you all to try and bring a bit more light to the world around us for a better future. Thank you all very much.
So, all that remains is for me to say what an emotional evening it's been. Thank you to our main speakers. We felt for you, Deborah, the children, very painful. Safet, the one thing that stands out for me with you is the fact that your mother sent you back home. What a relief. It's been wonderful to have you all here tonight. I would like to, just by the way, Brian, who just spoke, we always have children here. This year we had a children's choir who couldn't make it at the last minute, but we do have children. But I'd like to thank Harrow Council and all the councillors for all your help and support. Harrow Arts Centre, their team is quite amazing. I'd like to thank my team, and I've got to read just in case I miss any of them out. They are my committee. They're quite amazing and really helpful. But we have been working together for quite a few years. They are Gopal Bachu, Chair of Interfaith, John Hinckley, Rabbi Kathleen Middleton, Councillor Jean Lammerman, David Cryer, Trudy Siegel, Abraham Matthews, Sonu Malkanu, Councillor Janet Moat, and as I said, Harrow Arts Centre, all their team, you've been amazing, but especially Elsie Harvey, who has helped us tremendously. Every year we choose a charity and that we support. And this year, it may be a coincidence that it's a charity I've worked for quite a long time. It's called Bereavement Care. And we support bereaved people in the area. So please give generously as you leave this evening. There will be buckets by the door, and we do have a card reader if anybody would like to tap their card. And for those of you at home, I think we've got a QR code. So thank you all so much for coming. Have a safe journey home, and thank you again. Good night.